The chaos that this is creating is horrendous. No one voted to wake up this morning and wonder whether their child would get the care they need, wondered whether or not their parents would be kicked out of a nursing home, wondered whether or not the research that is so critical to keeping their child alive at NIH would continue.
David Jolly, just explain where the power comes from.
Sure. I spent 20 years with the Appropriations Committee, served on the Appropriations Committee. You see actions like this from a lot of White Houses. What you don't see is the raw violation of the Impoundment Act and the violation of the Article 2 Take Care Clause, which is what we saw from Donald Trump. What he has done is illegal. And in the incompetence of how he did it, he reveals the cruelty, right? This is an attack on wokeism and gender ideology and all these other reasons. His justification for it is what makes it illegal. So under the Impoundment Act, as Senator Kaine really put a fine point on, once an appropriation bill is signed into law by the president, it's considered a temporary spending bill because it expires after 1 year. But the president has to spend that money on the activity it's appropriated for. Now, what Donald Trump has suggested is, well, the last administration policies are different than mine. That's not actually a legal justification. There are very few narrowly tailored justifications for a president to say, I'm not going to spend the money. The closest one he could get to is efficiency, capturing new efficiencies. But even then, he has to send to Congress a notification. He either has to request to rescind the money, or he has to say, I'm pausing it based on efficiency, would be the closest thing he could get to. He didn't. What he said is, I'm not going to spend the money because I don't like these policies that are currently in place. And much like the Muslim ban, it showed the incompetency of an administration that doesn't know the law or is willing to violate the Constitution. And it revealed the cruelty of stopping Medicaid payments and child care payments and all of these other issues. And where it really implicates a lot of these state-based agencies is anyone that administers a grant. So a local human services agency that does refugee resettlement or a block grant to a state for Medicaid services, they don't know what to do now. And some of these agencies aren't sure if they can pay payroll. They're not allowed to do that because they can't obligate federal funds towards that. I don't know if they will fix this like they fixed the Muslim ban. There's a narrow way to do this, but Senator Kaine's point is really important here. All this is coming to a head in March. Because in March, Republicans own all of these decisions for themselves. Because what Donald Trump could have said is he could have issued guidance saying, going forward, any new grant applications or any renewals will now have to abide by my executive orders and my policies. You could probably get away with that. What you can't do is say, we're going to freeze already executed funding because I disagree with it. It's a violation of the law that Republicans are refusing to stand up to today. And good for all the senators for calling out not just the incompetence, but the cruelty that is underlying all.
Can I ask isn't this what he was impeached for refusing
this is Ukraine.
to give Ukraine?
This is exactly what he was impeached for. This was saying, I'm not going to execute Ukraine unless they do an investigation. But he got away with it. And, look, Congressman Tom Coles, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, a Republican who is he's an institutionalist. I always respected him for how he approached it. He's somebody that could have been a speaker or filled in after McCarthy. He said today, I'm not too worried about it because appropriations aren't really law. Appropriations are expiring law. Maybe he's got a little bit there. But the Impoundment Act is the law. And the Constitution says the president has to faithfully execute the laws that have been enacted. And if the message from Republicans is to just do the jig and shake and say, look over here, we are in a lot of trouble.
We are in a lot of trouble. I think they're doing, to quote David Jolly, quote, jig and shake at Doral. They're the golf club that they're all gathered at. Sam Stein, this is from your reporting. Quote, the breakneck speed of Trump's orders could quickly turn into an acute constitutional crisis, with the executive branch essentially usurping the power of the purse from the legislative body. Certainly, it has already had a profound political and psychological effect. Federal employees described utterly dispirited workplaces where paranoia is creeping in. But it's also not hard to see how the tremors being sent throughout the government could hurt Trump in the long run. Explain.
Well, first of all, David did an excellent job explaining. It's almost hard to follow that. That was so eloquent.
It's always hard to follow. Either
the nerdy stuff, Sam.
Nothing against Andrew either. Yeah, nothing against Andrew either. That was very eloquent too. But to the point, look, what we're seeing today is how it could backfire on Trump. So
Yeah.
let's just take, for instance, the Medicaid portal situation. So the Medicaid portal situation essentially is this. I'll try to condense it, but more or less states contribute a portion of the funds into this Medicaid disbursement system. The federal government contributes a lot. If you cannot access the federal government funds, you cannot pay people who are there to administer Medicaid, physicians, hospitals, et cetera. What states tend to have the most percentage of people on Medicaid? Red states. Mississippi, red states, poorer states. Those people tend to vote more Republican, and they are going to notice at some point in time that the services that they've come to depend on the government for are no longer there or no longer reliable. This is not just true of Medicaid, which I should note, the White House has quickly moved to say, oh, this is being cleaned up. It was a processing issue. Don't worry about it, which to me suggests that they recognize the acute political problems here. But it's across the board, right? You have people who rely on the Veterans Administration who are not going to get access to care. You have people who, and I saw this online over the weekend, people who are in clinical cancer research trials that are funded by the NIH who no longer can actually get access or are concerned that they may not get access to those research trials. Head Start, Meals on Wheels, any food assistance, those don't just affect Democrats, they affect Republicans too. And so at some point in time, events begin to intervene and they begin to impact politics. And while Trump can and is acting in this all-powerful manner, and while he's testing the limits of what our legal system and our courts can do, and while he will win a lot of these battles, eventually the political pressure starts to turn the other way, and he begins to harm his own voters. And also people get tired of the chaos, and they get exhausted by it as well.
Let me just add to what you're saying, an observation I've had in the last 24 hours from pinging Democrats and frankly, inviting them on this show. What Trump has done, again, wittingly or unwittingly, is to completely resuscitate the Democratic Party. They were flatlined spiritually, politically,
right.
Basically since the election night. And what he has done is they have suddenly woken up. They remember why they're there. They're there to make government work the way it's supposed to work. They're there to keep their promises to all voters, whether they voted for them or not. And the thing that you just outlined, what Trump has done is Republican governors, now whether they'll go on Fox and say it or not, who knows? But Republican governors are going to have to align themselves with the members of Congress who see the law the way David and Andrew just articulated, because Republican governors have a bleep ton of voters who would like their services funded, their cancer research. And Republican governors are a lot closer to their constituents. Sometimes they're their neighbors. They can show up. I mean, they're going to want to know why the Veterans Affairs mental health appointment they drove 3 hours to and waited 2 months for was suddenly canceled because of a political stunt. And what Trump has done is by pulling this political stunt, he has completely resuscitated the Democratic Party against him.
Yeah, it's the only caveat I would add to that, and it remains to be seen, is one of the clear objectives for this White House is to just flood the zone. And by that I mean a new thing, a new chaotic moment, a new crisis point is produced every day. And something that seems even more radical than what we just went through the day before. And so I woke up this morning, for instance, my inbox, my voicemail had been flooded with people worried deeply about this OMB memo, which I should point out was 2 pages. I mean, shutting down all federal grants through a 2-page memo is wild. But I woke up to a flood of voicemails and texts and emails. And the first thing I saw from the Senate Democrats was they were going to do a press conference going after Trump for the pardons of those who were involved in the January 6th riot. Noble, politically perhaps beneficial, but also that was a week ago. That was one day after Trump's inaugural where he issued those pardons. The news cycle is moving at a pace that I don't think any of us have ever experienced before. And the Democratic Party may be revived by some of this stuff, but they do need to get going, because sooner or later another crisis will present itself and we will be like, oh yeah, remember that time they tried to shut down Medicaid? That was a week ago and now we're on to something else.
The difference is caring about the pardons requires a human to care about somebody else. Even a cop. It requires a cop to care about another cop. And I think if we're being blunt, I'm not sure that's the moment we live in. But this is about you. This is about your drugs. This is about your child care. This is about your food stamps. This is about you. This is not something that the voters people who voted for Democrats, people who voted for Republicans, people didn't vote for either because they didn't think there was anything in either franchise for them. This is about them, and this doesn't go away with Trump's next outrageous tweet.
Donald Trump lies about a lot, provides a ton of misinformation. Conservative media does. The military didn't go into California to remarkably start water overnight. What he's saying, nobody's going to be affected, that's not true. The reason, to your point, that this matters is because this breaks through the misinformation. This breaks through the gaslighting. When you can't go to your doctor appointment, you can't go to child care, the Medicaid portal is shut down. Now you know Donald Trump is lying to you. And what I'm most curious about, I think Sam's point is right about the fast-paced news. It's certainly too early for what I'm about to say. But Donald Trump is a lame duck. And at what point does the misstep of Donald Trump or the incompetence of his administration kind of cross that needle with the lame duck? And look, lame duck is within 2 years. Republicans themselves are going to be running to replace him. Democrats are going to be looking for the future of the party. And we know the fatigue and exhaustion of a Trump administration. We're feeling it now. Republicans are feeling it now. At what point does the lame duck problem come in for Donald Trump as well? Because too much incompetence. Look, he is in his second term, and people lose the fever in a second term. So we'll see.